안녕하세요, 톰님.
안녕하세요.
네, 지금 저희가 어디에 와 있죠?
모브에 와 있습니다.
정확히 어디죠, 여기가?
여기가 론입니다. 북론. 장루이샤브를 만나러 가는 길입니다.
네.
장루이샤브를 간단하게 소개를 하면 이제 뭐 한 500년의 역사를 지니고 있고요. 16대 손이에요. 현재 장루이샤브가 와이너리를 담당하고 있고, 아버지인 제라드 샤브가 이제 1970년부터 와이너리를 맡아서 했고, 사실은 제라드 샤브가 지금의 명성을 있게 만들었고요. 그다음에 장루이샤브가 이제 UC 데이비스 미국에서 공부를 하고 거기서 이제 공부하면서 또 연애를 해요. 그래서 와이프 에린을 만났고 1992년도에 와이너리로 돌아와서
네.
지금의 멋진 와인을 만들고 있죠. 사실은 뭐 전 세계에서 가장 존경받는 생산자이고, 포도밭은 한 14.5헥타 정도 돼요.
생각보다 작네요.
예, 그렇게 많지는 않습니다.
네.
그래서 도메인 와인들은 14.5헥타에서 만들고 있고, 나머지는 이제 포도를 사서 만들고 있어요. 네. 셀렉션, 장루이샤브 셀렉션. 그래서 원래 와이너리가 생조셉에 있다가 필록슬라가 터져서 이제 여기 모브로 옮기게 됐습니다. 그래서 뭐 장루이샤브 하면 사실 에르미타주가 가장 유명하지만, 장루이샤브가 항상 이야기하는 거는 이제 생조셉이 나중에 북론의 미래가 될 거다고 이야기를 많이 하더라고요. 가보시죠. 장루이샤브는 이제 제가 일하는 이제 크리스탈과 일한 지가 한 8년 정도 됐고요. 이제 한국에 내년에 모시려고 오늘 이제 형님한테 읍소를 해야 돼요. 여기에요. 여기 보시면 도메인 장루이샤브, 제라드 샤브 이제 써져 있어요.
On a un rendez-vous avec Jean-Louis à 10h au domaine. Merci.
이제 이쪽으로 오시면 됩니다. 보세요. 저쪽이 이제 사무실이고, 이쪽이 원래 샤브 집이에요. 그러니까 사실은 저번에 왔을 때는 샤브 와이프 에린이 밥 해줘서 밥 먹고 갔었죠. 네.
Bonjour.
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 Bonjour. Good to see you.
Ça va?
Yeah, good.
Ouais.
Good.
Merci. Bonjour.
Vous allez bien?
Oui, et vous?
Ça va?
Ouais, très bien.
Actually, this is small gift for you.
Oh, thanks
Yeah.
so much. It's very kind. Thanks so much.
Salut Jean-Louis.
So you just arrived? No, where were you?
Yeah, yesterday night I just arrived in Paris and moved
Okay.
to.
From...
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, so how much time do you have today? And tell me.
Yeah, until they have
12.
another appointment in Jura.
In Jura?
Yeah. So yeah.
You're very trendy. Jura was very trendy in New York.
Yeah.
All the sommelier, you know,
Yeah.
and they loved it in
Yeah.
Jura.
Yeah.
It's great.
Because of the Burgundy price one they shouldn't look at.
But Burgundy,
Yeah.
I don't know what you think about it, but it's like I think every single day people told me about the problem now.
Yeah.
Because I think what happened this couple years back, people bought the wines.
Yeah.
Because you know the restaurants say, okay, they've bought the wines.
Yeah.
The importer bought the wines. Okay, and everything based on these collectors, blah 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 blah. But at the end now, they start to be worried because the restaurants are not buying anymore, for sure.
Yeah.
At least in France, because
Yeah.
they say, can we sell the wines?
Yeah.
Because it's so. Wines we used to buy at 200, now they're 1,000 or whatever, and
Yeah.
they say we can sell them.
Yeah.
So then what's happening? The Burgundians are surprised that people don't say yes to the allocation.
No.
For them it was like natural to sell the wines, but things went a bit too extreme. I think. I think wine has to be drunk, no matter
Yeah.
the level.
Yeah.
I mean, the wines exist when they are drunk. If they are only collected, and that's the problem of collection. It's like, and then what's happening in Burgundy is 2022 and 2023. It's a huge crop.
Yeah.
So there will be a lot of wines.
Then they have to, price down with huge amount of
That's my
They
big
don't
difficulty.
think so. They don't think so.
Yeah.
But except if we have more wine drinkers, but I think it's difficult too. It's not easy. In America, people are drinking less,
Yeah, right.
for sure.
Yeah.
In Europe, for sure, people are drinking less. And also COVID was tricky because people stayed home and they drank more than normal. And that was totally unexpected. But now, after COVID, people sometimes prefer to travel, people prefer to spend money in a different way. Maybe, who knows. So anyway, it's great to see you. It's
to see
been
you.
some, when you came last, no?
Last November maybe.
Last
Yeah,
November.
and
Nice, so great
It's been a
that-
year.
yeah.
You know, I give you a lot of credit for that because I think what is really important is the relationship between the market and the production, and we really need distribution, and distribution is very important. And that was the other thing, is like all these shortcuts that people took to sell direct to the final client. I mean, you need to be very careful with that. I think the distribution is so important. For sure, like sometimes, I think in Burgundy they saw things that way. I mean, it's so easy to sell like 12 bottles to the collector in Shanghai and deliver direct, but
We don't do that.
short-term
Yeah, yeah.
thinking. Because that's not how you build a very long-term relationship with the market. So 23,
Yeah.
the wines were moved from barrels in tanks,
Okay.
maybe 2 weeks ago. So the first one is Pelea, and 22.
22.
Ça, c'est 20.
That's when you get older. It's like you mixed all the vintages and you're like, ooh, 22. And 22, the first thing we have to say about the vintage is so early. We picked for the first time ever in August 23.
August 23.
Yeah,
Very
for the
old.
first time ever.
Okay.
Yeah. And 21 was picked September 18.
Okay.
Big difference. But actually very good grapes, very ripe, and very sound, good grapes. So that's Pelea. Pelea, it's on clay and sand. Pelea gives a pretty rich and fatty white Hermitage. So again, white Hermitage is not, we talked about Jura before. The Jura is a trendy place right now. White Hermitage is not very trendy because the trend in white is about acidity. Hermitage is not about acidity, it's about texture. But thing comes and goes, so maybe one day we'll be back in the trend.
Before it was trendy, no? I mean,
Exactly.
Years ago.
It was because before food was about texture, about the product and the texture. Just like when I told you the poulet au vin jaune, this time so this was for the sweet bread, for the veal, like all the poulards, the morels. You need the richness in the dish now. So actually now for sure you can go to a 3-star Michelin restaurant and have champagne from the start
To the end.
to the end.
Yeah.
Even for red wines, it starts to be difficult now.
True.
So actually, this is why in France now, I mean for sure, there are a few exceptions for sure, but the wine lovers, say, looking for like different kind of restaurants, more like the bistro gastronomy. Bistronomie, exactly.
Pierre told me that the yeast is like champignon d'automne. It's like autumn fungus.
Yeah.
So he just noticed that the fermentation with the natural yeast it's very difficult because you pick the grapes now. People pick the grapes in summer.
Oh, I see what you mean.
Yeah, that's what he told me.
Who told you that?
Pierre Auvergnat.
Ah, okay.
Yeah, I mean.
It's you know, it's not wrong, but also what we have to say though is we are surprised to see how nature adapts. And when you say nature adapt, yeast are part of nature. And it's shocking now to realize that the yeast are much stronger than what they used to be in the past. We have no choice other to follow the natural yeast. Because if you start to use commercial yeast in your wine, it means that's the end of the story. Because the yeast are part of the terroir.
Of the terroir, yeah.
And that's a very, very important point. And because when we talk about natural wine, for sure wine has to be natural. And commercial wine is always the product. Commercial wines, commercial yeast, blah, 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 blah. Okay. But wines from a site, from a terroir, has to be made with natural yeast. That's the base of the philosophy.
Yeah.
So, for sure, as Pierre said, it's a worry, because if you can't ferment your wine because the yeast can't adapt, I mean that's the end of the story, because then the other, it's just like with the big thing now about irrigation.
Yeah.
The same thing, if you need to irrigate your wines, that's the end of the story too. So, but the yeast is a very good point. Yeah. But with this idea of global warming, for sure something's happening. Okay. But we have to adapt, obviously. If one day it's not possible to make wine in Hermitage, I will say fine. You know, everything has a beginning and everything has an end. And Hermitage maybe has been around for like 2,000 years or like 3,000. It's nothing compared to the...
Yeah.
So, and actually, why should we always fight? You know, for sure we try to do our best, which means that fighting to a certain level, but it's not right to say we'll change grape, we'll use, I don't know, like, I mean, that's, if it's the end, it's the end, it's all good, you know. That's Rhone. And Rhone is the clay, same clay, but Pélia is clay and sand. When it's only sand is red, and it's Pélia red, that will taste. And same clay, but this has more limestone. So the wine is as rich, but has a lift to it. The way of thinking when you make wine is very important, because otherwise it doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense to ship a bottle of wine to Korea if at the end it's just like a commercial product, because I think we need to bring something interesting to people who drink the wine, and that could be at any level, because otherwise the young people in Korea, they will be better off to drink something else, and that's, you know, like a good local beer or a good local spirit, I don't know.
And every year we release your wine, and we have testing, like we invited sommelier, and we open the whole range of wine and they testing wine, and I explain about the vintage, what 2020 this is, and this is final product, and because you know I'm not selling wine, I'm introduced like a culture, and so.
But you see, exactly, I think wine, I mean, I don't want to be too crazy, but it's like a religion. You need some, you need to preach, you need to, some ambassador, you need to tell the story, you need to, because wine is more than wine. At the end, it's a place, it's people, it's so many other things. And I think this is much more interesting than sell wines. I mean, for sure, at the end, you need to sell wines, but this is very important. It's more, and that's the beauty when I see in the video of what you have organized in Korea with these producers, and at the end, it's good time, and the end is what wine should be about, you know. I mean, it's great. So this is l'ermite.
예전에 한번 제가 장루이한테 뭐라고 한 적이 있냐면, 이렇게 끌리마가를 가지고 있으니까 다른 사람들처럼 이제 끌리마별로 와인을 만드는 게 어떠냐고 물어본 적이 있어요. 그러니까 장루이가 뭐라고 했냐면, 에르미타주의 가장 큰 매력은 블렌딩의 매력이다. 근데 그게 빈치에 따라서 이 끌리마가 가진 성격이 다르다. 어느 해는 이걸 좀 더 하고, 어느 해는 이걸 좀 빼고, 어느 해는 또 이걸 더 하고, 이런 식으로 만드는 게 에르미타주의 진정한 매력이라고 해서, 사실은 이제 싱글 비냐드를 제법 가지고 있음에도 불구하고 그걸 다 블렌딩해서 하나의 와인으로 만드는 게 철학이라고 이제 예전에 이야기해 주셨어요.
So l'ermite is a different soil. It's called l'eus. It's a soil that came with the winds. So very like a dust. Very light. Very light. Maison Blanche. So Maison Blanche is very different. It's always more tight, and in some ways it's more Burgundy-like. You know, it's more based on the acidity. It's more tight, it's more vibrant, and so it's not the idea we have of white Hermitage, because our idea is more about the richness, the texture. But this one is very important because it will give a lift to a Pelea, for example. The Pelea could be very rich, and when it's too rich, it could be a bit flabby. So you need to a little punch, and that's what the Maison Blanche will give.
And why you lately release for the Maison wine, like a Hermitage Blanche? Like Hermitage just released 2020 vintage, but you just released 19 vintage for Blanche. It's a 1 year's gap.
Yeah, it's 1 year gap because actually it's a very good question. What is important for the domain is always this idea of blending, and the left, what's left, it's Blanche.
Okay. Okay.
But I don't want the market to see it as a second wine.
Okay.
For me, it's very important to be. It's a different. It's a different project.
Okay.
Because I don't like the idea of second wines, because the second wines, it's not that interesting. The first wine is interesting. The second wine, okay, it means it's less good, less expensive, less. Okay. No, I want the wines to have a different story in a different place, and this is why we, at the time we had created this Chave selection, is to try to introduce people to Hermitage in a different way.